Episode 4, The Ex-Girlfriend. Before we start, please like and subscribe. Stop! Albert dashed between Jeff and Diane. Before Jeff could speak, Diane waved the Supreme card in the air. Her eyes flashed with triumph as she said to Albert, "Mr. Miller, look, he stole a card from the VIP room." She smiled at him, her expression a little smug. Surely Mr. Miller would be happy with her for preventing theft. He had a lot of authority in the Eastern District of Metro Manila Bank, and when he had arrived at headquarters, he had seemed impressed with her. So she was hoping for a promotion. Her imagination began to run away with her as she dreamed about her possible future. Mr. Miller's face had always been a little glum, but as she watched, his expression grew darker and darker. Before she could figure out why, she was startled by his explosive roar, leaving her entire body trembling. "Let go of Mr. Florento," as he yelled. Mr. Miller knocked the Supreme card out of her hand, and she was so scared that she let go of Jeff. Mr. Miller pushed her aside and bent down to pick up the card. "Mr. Florento, your card. I'm very sorry I haven't trained Miss Gonzalez properly. I do apologize." Mr. Miller's expression showed a mixture of respect, embarrassment, and unease as the bank's customers looked on in amazement. Diane was stunned. Could the Supreme card be his? She wondered, her eyes widened. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make sense of it. If this man had a Supreme card, then he had at least $3 million. Yet he appeared to only be around 20 years old. A poor, lower-class loser with that much money now. It was just too unlikely. "It's not your fault, Mr. Miller," Jeff assured him, slipping the card back into his pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Florento." Albert dipped his head and paused briefly before straightening up and shouting at Diane, "Why are you just standing there? Apologize to Mr. Florento immediately." How could Diane still not understand? Albert thought. The young man standing in front of them was seriously rich and needed to be treated with respect. Diane immediately bowed her head at Jeff. "Mr. Florento, I'm very sorry for my rude behavior. I made a mistake. I created a fuss over nothing and put my hands on you. It was my fault, and I will reflect on my behavior." Jeff ignored her and walked away. "Mr. Florento," Albert called after him, "if you ever need anything, just give me a call and I'll do my best to help." Albert was excited by this opportunity. It was rare to meet someone as important as Jeff, so he shamelessly tried to charm him. "Okay, Albert." Jeff smiled faintly. Albert had come to his defense after all. The use of his first name made Albert feel quite emotional. The wealthiest customers called him by his first name, and now so did this poorly dressed young man, who had displayed not even a hint of arrogance. Jeff strode out of the bank and hailed a taxi to take him back to Peston University. As Jeff entered the university building, he accidentally stepped into a puddle, splashing a lot of mud on his legs. He checked his watch, then rushed toward the classroom, where Mr. Kent was already standing at the podium, lecturing. He spotted Jeff out of the corner of his eye, and a hint of disappointment flashed across his face. Feeling guilty, Jeff lowered his head. Of all his teachers, Mr. Kent was his favorite. The other teachers tended to ignore Jeff because he had no money, and some even openly mocked him. Only Mr. Kent treated him like any other student. Jeff slipped quietly into the classroom, aware that all the students were staring at him, and he could hear them whispering. "He isn't usually late. Hell must have frozen over. Look at his pants. They're filthy. Doesn't he have any clean clothes?" "Are you joking? It's not like he'd have the money for new ones. It looks like he'd just thrown on whatever he could find." Some of the boys continued to talk, and the girls in the front row covered their mouths with their hands as they joined in. Their eyes flashed with contempt when they looked at Jeff. "Stop talking," Mr. Kent said loudly, "and pay attention." Throughout the lecture, Jeff noticed that Mr. Kent kept glancing at him, his eyes full of disapproval, as if Jeff had failed to live up to his expectations. Eventually, the lecture was over. Class dismissed. Mr. Kent packed up his textbooks and left. "Jonah," the voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned in the direction of the voice and saw Jake walking through the door and going straight to Jonah, who was sitting by the window. She stood and hugged him, pulling him in close to her body. Jake lowered his head, and the two of them began to kiss. Many of the students turned to stare at Jeff. Everyone thought that he was Jonah's boyfriend, and they weren't aware that she had broken up with him. Jeff watched in disgust. He'd heard that Jake had taken at least 5 different girls to stay at that hotel. Jonah was just the latest in a long line, and Jeff had no intention of fighting for her. Jake strutted past Jeff with his arm around Jonah's waist. "Darling, wait a minute," Jonah said to Jake as she stopped in front of Jeff and held out her phone. "Since we've broken up, I don't want to owe you anything. Here's the phone you bought for me a few weeks ago. You can have it back." Jeff glanced at the Samsung Galaxy phone and then took it. "Ha, you would have to work part-time for 6 months to afford one of these." Jonah took a brand new phone out of her pocket and showed it to Jeff. "This is the latest iPhone, and it's much better than your phone. Of course, it's far too expensive for a loser like him." Jake raised his chin and looked at Jeff. "Jonah told me that she kept asking for that phone for 6 months before you finally bought it for her. Do you think you can pick up a girl so far out of your league? You're just embarrassing yourself. So give up. And I'm warning you now, don't even think about her. If I find out you've gone anywhere near her, you'll regret it. Don't waste your breath talking to a loser like him. Can we go to Shakey's for lunch?" Jonah had already dismissed Jeff. "Call me baby," Jake said, smiling at her. "Baby, let's go." She flirted with him right in front of Jeff. Jonah, a petite girl, stood up, glaring at her. "You're taking it all too far. I never thought you'd break up with Jeff, and I'm ashamed of you." "Emma, why do you care?" She scowled. When things had been going well with Jeff, she'd been on good terms with Emma, who was a decent person. Sometimes when Jonah had been fighting with Jeff, she'd asked Emma's opinion about who was in the right. "You gave up Jeff for someone like Jake?" Emma asked. "How could you treat Jeff like this when you were sick and couldn't even get out of bed? Jeff sent you lunch and dinner every day for a month. And when you were walking in the mountains and twisted your ankle, he carried you on his back for miles down the mountain. Don't you remember that? You know he doesn't make much money from his part-time jobs. But when you wanted a phone, he worked hard for months to save enough money to buy it for you. And this is how you repay him, by breaking up with him and ridiculing him." Jonah scowled. "I've never forced him to do anything. If he was stupid enough to go along with it, that's his problem. And so what if he bought me a cell phone who's only a Samsung? And why would I want a Samsung when I can have an iPhone?" Emma shook her head. "Jonah, I don't understand you. Do you only care about money? Will money get you everything you want?" "Yes." Jonah barred of a laugh. She stared at Emma and said, "I admit that I like money. Is that so wrong?" She took Jake's arm and said, "Come on, baby, let's go. These 2 poor people disgust me." She glared at Jeff and Emma and then swept out of the classroom with her head held high. To be continued. For more upcoming episodes, please like and subscribe.